Hey everyone, before we get into this week's episode, I have a little announcement. I recently launched the Awesome Finds newsletter. So each week, I'm going to share a few spotlights on creative people and projects, meaningful stories, and new ideas, all with the goal of sparking our imaginations. So sharing's great, but for me, this is more than just sharing. This is about spreading new ideas and happiness. Okay, that may sound a tiny bit cheesy, but it's true because I believe when we're sharing creativity and ideas, that can spread joy and happiness around. At least that's how I see it. I'm also hoping this helps us cut through all the noise that's all over our social feeds lately and makes this kind of discovery a little bit easier. So here's the simple truth of why I'm doing this. I just want to share the great stuff in the world that energizes me to energize you. So if you want to sign up or want more info about it, go to awesomefinds.info. That's awesomefinds.info. awesomefinds.info. And don't worry, I promise it's a short email and a very quick read. It's supposed to be fun and interesting. I really hope you guys like it. Okay, now to the show. Hey everyone, it's Christopher Swan and welcome to this week's episode of Living Your Journey. Each week I have this amazing opportunity to chat with people that love what they do in life. They understand their passions and their direction. Maybe it's a career path or it's the social impact that they're making. It's kind of like they're following their North Star, but they know their story may change and they understand that they're on a journey every day. On the show this week is Wade Davis, a former NFL player that's now helping to educate the world about gender, race, and orientation equality. He's focused on highlighting issues that directly impact women and girls. He's launched various campaigns and has partnered with organizations like the Miss Foundation, Ebony Magazine, the NFL, and Huffington Post Women. Wade and I talk about the why and the how behind his journey and the impacts he's hoping to make. And I think journey is the perfect word here, as you'll hear Wade went from playing with the NFL to coming out as a gay man publicly to advocating for the LGBTQ community to broadening his influence to gender and race equality. Wade also shares some terrific personal stories and a deeper look into his purpose to helping others. I really resonate with a lot of what Wade is doing. The topics he's challenging are so personally important to me as well. And knowing that equality is top of mind for so many of us, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation, and you'll even hear some advice about pursuing your own truth. Everyone, meet Wade. Wade, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So I mentioned this to you earlier that, I've been a fan of some of your work as well. So I'm really excited that you're on the show today because I think some of the stuff that you're doing is very personally important to me. And I also think it's top of mind for many right now. So you do a lot of things, so I started to research you, Wade, and I was familiar with stuff that you're already doing, but gosh, I thought, wow, professionally, you're a writer, you're a public speaker, you're an educator. Some might use the word activist. So before we get into the details, I kind of want to ask you this, kind of the key question. Why be this educator or air quote, an activist? Like, what drives you to spread the change of what you're doing?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say the biggest driver for the work that I do is just, someone who came from a very a marginalized background, who rose to a certain level of prominence and privilege, just trying to give back. And then also, I did a lot of work with young people who are LGBT, who are homeless, who people thought of as at risk and not, I like to say, at promise. Just really hearing their stories, being educated about the struggles that they had, it just really started to inspire me. And there was nothing else that I felt that I could be doing, besides trying to educate myself first, but then to try to inspire others who have certain levels of access and privilege to add their voice to the conversation to make sure that people, like the kids that I work with, at least know that on any given day, there's someone out there who's fighting for them. And right now, to be honest with you, I could not go out and do another job. Like, I would be so misaligned with what I think that my purpose is in life, that if I wasn't doing some type of activism, I might as well, just die. A lot of my friends always say that they don't even recognize me anymore, and I actually think that that's a good thing. I don't think that, when I finished playing football, that I knew what I was going to do next, and I think I was really fortunate to be able to find a deep hidden passion inside of me that was for social justice activism.
It's interesting that you even talk about how maybe your friends don't even recognize you now. I wonder if this is true for you, the more that you get involved in the thing that you've discovered that you do love, the more important that you see it is, that's the more that you couldn't go to another job, because now like your eyes are awake, that how important this is. Is that true?
100%. I think the term that people use now is called being woke. I think a part of being woke is also that you're on fire. Like that there's something inside you that's burning to do more and to learn more. And I think the more that I educate myself on like the history of inequality, whether it be around gender, sexual orientation, race, I definitely able folks. Like the more that I'm educated on these topics, the more alive that I become and the more passionate I become. I think my biggest struggle is to not spread myself so thin that I start to not become any good to myself, and therefore not any good to people who I'm fighting for.
I'm so glad you talked about this, not spreading yourself too thin, because I've been thinking about some of the stuff that you stand for. Like, I think, turned on to you talking about LGBT communities. And then as I started to see more, it was also about, gender equality and feminism. And I know that you're kind of aligned around gender, race, and orientation equality. Do those intersect for you? And maybe also the why those? Why specifically each one of those? Now, the LGBT I probably get more, but I understand obviously that as part of your story, but like, where do those align and why so important?
Yeah, I think that the first book that I was ever given to read was a book by Bell Hooks called Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center. And what I took from that book was that if you're going to do the work of trying to end any type of discrimination and inequality, you must start with those who sit at the margin. So those who are the most marginalized. And if you start there and you work your way to the center, you get everyone. So when I started doing specifically LGBTQ work, it was because that was probably the most proximal in my life. I had just started to come out. I was, really had this focus on the fact that I wanted the world to know that I was LGBT. So I was really invested in educating myself on that. And then as I read more, I started to see this intersection between sexual orientation and gender inequality, and then I started to, honestly believe that the root of homophobia was actually sexism, right? And then if I wasn't doing the work to end gender inequality, then I would never end sexual orientation and gender identity inequality. So it just made perfect sense that, hey, like that the root of what I'm fighting for is actually centered around women's rights. And then as I started to do work with trans individuals, trans women were the most marginalized. A friend of mine, Brittany Cooper, posted this article where she said that the life expectancy for a trans woman of color is 35 years. And like just a stat like that is like almost like a shotgun shot, like to your chest, and you're like, damn, So if I truly want to align myself with queer feminist theory, then I have to start with those who are the most marginalized. So that would be, trans women of color, I think, right now. So all of those things just started to align very clearly to me. And I think my greatest challenge is to be able to articulate a narrative that people can understand. So people just don't think that I'm this guy who's doing work in all these different spaces that actually don't intersect. But I truly believe that racial inequality, gender inequality and sexual orientation and gender identity inequality all come together in this very toxic way, that those people who sit at that intersection are the most marginalized. So I should definitely start my work in activism and education then.
Have you found, I'm just going to pause for a second and just say, I absolutely agree. I think all of these things are linked. I think probably most things in the world, when we look at racism and then, the toxic behaviors that we see are probably all linked in some way. As you trying to carve out this narrative, have you found that people are coming along for the ride? Like, are they starting to bridge the gap? Because I don't think everybody sees it the way that you see it, and it's probably really important to get to the root before you can actually fix anything. So, are people understanding?
Yeah, I'm trying to meet people where they're at along their journey. I'm actually out in Orlando with a close friend of mine. His name is Preston Roberts, and he was telling me that he thinks about gender inequality in different ways that he has before he met me, right? And Preston is someone who's highly intelligent and a critical thinker. So the fact that I could get him for a second to start to think differently, and not that my ways or ideas or thoughts are better than his, right, or anyone else's, but just if I can get him to pause and think, when he sees, Trump and 7 other men signing, an executive order around controlling women's bodies for a second, like he can think that, wow, like there's actually not a woman at the table to actually articulate thoughts around this idea, then I think that I'm doing something to hopefully impact, his world, others' worlds, but then also listening to, as he's telling me, why this does or doesn't resonate to him. So I think as much as I'm trying to impact others, I'm also trying to be very conscious of listening to what they're saying, to hone in my message better, and to not think that I'm the end all be all on what it means to be an activist for those who are marginalized.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like really you're the translator. Or the connector to the ideas wherever they're at or the way that they see things.
Yeah, and I think that, what I'm really, really focused on now, as I start to travel around and have these messages, is how do I listen back? How do I talk a lot, because you have to as you're delivering messages, but, also take the time to listen to see if the message is connecting. And if it's not, why is it not connecting? Like, how am I delivering it in such a way that I'm missing someone? How do I not make people feel like every time that they come around me, I'm talking about these issues? So therefore they go, wow, I don't want to talk to Wade. Like, he's going to bring up some gay stuff. Or he's going to talk about race. Or he's going to talk about women. Like, I can't even, like there is that tension, that as you're trying to be a messenger of justice, that people tend to tune you out. So how do I find a delicate balance, especially with my close friends, who may not be at the same level of consciousness I am around this specific issue, but there are issues that everyone is passionate about. So how can you connect things that they're passionate about to some issues that I am, and then add them to the fight, for lack of a better word?
Here's something I was just thinking about this, because when I talk to you, I think you obviously can articulate this well. You've been doing it for a while. It just seems natural. And as you mentioned this about, making sure that you're not the guy that's always talking about this one thing and, like nobody's going to listen to you anymore or they want to hear about it. I'm wondering, like, was this a learned behavior or a learned consciousness? Because if you're right out of the NFL, like you mentioned earlier, that you weren't really sure where you're going to go, what was next. Like, has this just been, as you've been going and progressing along, really kind of diving in and learning about, like, even how to play this role or how to be this connector or share these messages?
I think honestly, it has been a couple different things. Like, one, I think some of it is just pure luck. That right person, right place, right time. Like, people always ask, why didn't I come out while I was playing? And I'd say often that I would have been the worst messenger for LGBT equality while I was playing, because I was dealing with so much internalized shame and homophobia. And I didn't have the education or the language to be able to talk about it. So I think part of, the good luck and good fortune was that I wasn't kind of put into a space where I had to talk about this when I wasn't ready. I was allowed to talk about this on my own terms when I had, people like my former boss, Lillian Rivera, my colleagues, Darnell Moore and Bryson Rose and Teak Milan, like all of them, started to just give me so much information and education, but then also challenge me in very gentle and sometimes even harsher ways around my thinking. So I think that some of it was luck. I think that also something inside of me was dormant that those individuals and working with those kids helped to bring out. I often tell the story that I think I was like 9 or 10, and I'm a religious boy. Well, at least I grew up religious. I'm not very religious now, but I remember being in church with my mother, and I went to this, very Southern Baptist hellfire and brimstone church, and I asked my mother, why were there no women in the pulpit? Because it was just only men. And she told me to shut up, because at that moment she knew the answer, but saying the answer is actually very, very painful for some of us often. So I think as even a kid, I was questioning, what was happening around me even before I knew how to name it. So I think that, that social justice thing that was inside of me that was dormant was actually kind of awakened at the perfect time.
Mm-hmm. I really love too that even maybe others saw a little bit. Maybe that was the help that maybe you needed even to awake that dormant piece. I want to take a step back, because we've talked about it a little bit on the side. So I believe you came out publicly in 2012, if I have the date right.
Yeah.
So here's what I've been thinking. I mean, I'm glad that you did it, obviously, and you got to do it for yourself. That's what it's all about. But my question is why do it publicly and why then? I mean, I know that you mentioned if you were going to do it, while you're playing, you didn't have the words, and it would have been the right option there. But so you're out of the NFL at this point. Why publicly? Because not everybody does that way. Did you feel like there was like when I came out, I didn't write an email or tell everybody to go on TV. I didn't have the platform for it. But I guess I'm wondering, like, what was the driver for you at that point to do it?
Yeah, that's actually one of the easier answers. So when I first moved to New York City, it was around 2006. And then I was kind of searching for like gay spaces, to form a community and meet other people. And I was really struggling. And then I got really lucky that I found this website called Outsports. And Outsports is a site ran by a friend of mine named Sid Ziegler. And I reached out to Sid, saying that, hey, like I saw this website, you all have a football league. I would love to, join it or something, not really understanding what it was, but I knew that there was an intersection that I could maybe join because there were gay men who liked sports, and that was me. And I reached out to Sid, and he was like, yeah, oh my God, like, I think I know who you are, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you come out and quote unquote try out for the gay football team? And I thought the word try out was fascinating, right? I was like, yeah, I'll try out. And then I show up, and I didn't think gay men played sports, because it was such an anomaly to me. So I walk out there, I see all these gay guys throwing the football around. And I remember thinking to myself, like, these are like unicorns, like real life unicorns.
That's kind of true.
So I try out and I make the team, but it was like the first time I had a community of individuals who were outside of my typical friendship group. And then Sid, since he was a writer, he was like, hey, if you ever want to tell your story, I would love to write it. And I was like, dude, that's not going to happen. I have no desire to come out publicly because, first of all, I was a scrub. I got cut and signed and sent to Europe and cut and signed, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, and I thought that no one cared. I was like, who cares about, this scrub who played in the NFL, and who's gay? Like, no one cares. Because, again, my lack of consciousness around how impactful, visibility just wasn't there. And then I was really fortunate enough, as I mentioned earlier, to get this job at that youth serving organization called the Henry Martin Institute. And it was there where I met so many young sheroes and heroes who were living in their truth and doing it, at the age of 13, 14, 15. And I started being inspired. I was like, wow, like this is a big deal. Like this is honestly like there's a there, as my old boss used to say. And Sid just kept asking me and asking me and asking me, and I just kept saying no, 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 because I still didn't get it. But then there were young people at the organization who would tell me that, because I also didn't tell people when I started working there that I played in there. So I didn't want that to be a part of why people wanted to talk to me. I really wanted to just be like this fly on the wall. And the CEO at the time, Thomas Crever, who I owe a lot to, because he didn't have to give me that job. He actually shouldn't have. I wasn't qualified for it. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So I'm eternally grateful for that. But as I started working there, I realized that they had stories that were untold. You know, that there were young trans kids and gender nonconforming kids and, you know, lesbians who had stories that no one was ever going to hear about. So when I told Sid that he could write the story, I told him that he could do it, but I wanted a part of the story to be about the work that I was doing and the young people. And if I was ever going to use my platform, it would be to articulate the stories of others, create space for them to tell their stories, and to hope, you know, get people much more interested about what was happening to people who didn't have CNN coming to talk to them when they said that they were gay, right? So that was really what undergirded me coming out publicly.
Well, there's a perfect segue to, because I was looking at some of the work that you've been doing also with You Can Play, and it seems like there's a great connection there too. Like maybe that was that next evolution for you of creating some of the education that you're doing in that space. Can you talk around what your work is with You Can Play?
So after I came out, probably 6 months later, a gentleman named Patrick Burke, who was one of the three co-founders of You Can Play, he was like, hey, there's this sports symposium that happens at Nike campus. I would love for you to come and just learn about it. And I was like, well, actually, I can't go, but that's the same day that I was going to the White House to meet the president for the first time. So I was like, I think I'm going to go see President Obama. You know, I was
yeah,
like,
no offense, but
exactly, yeah. But Patrick was very persistent. So afterwards, he was like, hey, you know, I'm looking to move into a different position with the NHL, and I would love for you to come on as the executive director of You Can Play. And at that point, again, I didn't have the understanding that this was an issue in the sports world. Like, I knew that there weren't openly gay athletes, but I was more thinking about still articulating the message of young kids of color who are marginalized and who are LGBT, and not really transitioning into the sports space. But if you know Patrick Burke, he is really persistent. And he was like, hey, this is going to give you a larger platform and a larger audience. You can, you know, talk about both. So I said yes. So I left the Henry Martin Institute and became the ED at You Can Play. And then we started getting partnerships with the NFL, the NHL, Major League Soccer, the CFL, and just my platform grew. And because I was one of the few openly gay players who was also able to get in front of the media, articulate a message, do it with nuance and intersection, and people just hadn't seen that before. It was like, wow, like this guy, you know, as a former athlete, he's also Black. He's not he's not monolithic in the way that he can just talk about sports. And I think that was a big part of it, that they had never seen someone like me before in a lot of ways. So that was the genesis of You Can Play. And our work at You Can Play is really centered around how do you educate athletes at the high school, college, and pro level, along with coaches and front office staff, about how do you create a safe and welcoming environment in the sports world for athletes who identify as LGBTQ. We did that, I think, much different from most organizations. We didn't show up telling people how they should think. We showed up very, very curious, wanting to learn how you got to that space where you thought that being gay was X, Y, or Z. And we really started to have really closed-door, private conversations with athletes, creating a space for them to be honest, and we didn't judge them, right? I didn't walk into a meeting with the New York Giants and say, hey, I am Jesus who's walking on water. I would say, hey, I'm Wade Davis. I'm gay, but I'm also someone who used the term faggot like it was the word the. You know, I'm also someone who is still struggling with certain, you know, levels of internalized homophobia. So I'm here to engage you all in a conversation. I don't want you to think that there's a right or wrong, because there really isn't. But what there is compassion. So how do we have this conversation where we create an environment where all, folks who are LGBT feels like that, these athletes care about them in the sports world and want to be educated about how they can be better. So if there is a gay person on their team or in the front office, that person will feel safe enough to say, hey, there are players on this team who will support me and love me. So I'm in a space where I can either tell the media, I can just tell my teammates, I can tell my coach, or I can tell no one. But I know that if I did choose to tell someone, that there are a couple people on this team who will love and embrace me.
That's a great way to go about it, Wade. Like there's no right answer here, and that you really you were so transparent about where you were coming from too. Maybe there was still some baggage there with the internalized homophobe, because I don't think everybody would have gone that way. That's powerful.
Well, I think that what I learned from working with the young people is that if you ever try to show up as if you've got it all figured out, no one wants to talk to you. Because now you've elevated yourself to this space where, like, I'm good, you're bad. If you don't do it my way, there is no middle ground. And when you're talking to other grown men, you definitely can't take that tactic. So it was like, I can honestly tell you that I would not be the person I am today without Hedge Martin Institute. I learned how to be an activist. I learned how to have compassion for those who don't have the same views as me. I learned more there in my 2.5 years there than any other time in my life, because people's lives are kind of in the balance. So you have to listen and care in a different way that I had ever experienced. And I also think that me being a former athlete, having to, every year of my life engage with someone new, right? So every year I played a sport, there was someone new who joined the team from a different race, religion, class, culture, just what have you. So that training that I didn't realize that was happening was existing there. And those skills are very much so transferable when you're trying to engage people who are different from you.
So I caught on to a lot of what you were doing with the TEDx talk that you did.
Okay.
So, and I saw that, and obviously that's made the rounds a little bit as well. And I mean, it's powerful, and that's where I also saw this intersection. I mean, I knew a little bit of your story before that, but that's where I really started this intersection of gender, feminism, equality. That seems from the outside like a large, not pivot, but maybe a milestone in kind of your message or reaching larger audiences. I'm curious, is that true? And I'm wondering, what has that done for maybe your path so far? Or has that helped excelled you into a different direction or further along?
I don't. That's an interesting question. I would say that that I didn't have a choice but to start talking about gender equality, because I really saw it as the missing piece to the work that I was doing. And I say that because when I was talking to men, specifically in all male spaces around racism, they got it. When we would talk around LGBT inclusion, they got it. What I found was the missing piece was that there was always a different pushback when I talked about issues of misogyny and sexism. And then I started to just read a lot more and then also just kind of interrogate my own life. And I saw how sexist that I was and still am, and I was just like, damn, like I'm, preaching this message of X, Y, and Z, but I still have not done the work to look at myself very, very closely. And the ways that even now, as someone who considers himself a feminist, still have a long way to go. And I wanted to start to have those conversations on a broader scale, but also connect them to my own history and my own story. And it just felt really natural. It didn't feel forced. It felt even more alive than when I talked about LGBTQ issues, if that could be understood. And it didn't feel like it was a departure from the LGBT work. It felt like and both from the LGBT work. That if I wasn't talking about gender equality, then I might as well stop talking about LGBT equality.
The TEDx talk, I mean, have you seen that from just a growth of message as well? Like, I mean, it just seems like that created a wave of maybe new listeners or people joining them or the march of the message. Has that helped in kind of your path and your journey?
I don't know if it's helped. I think that people are looking at me saying, wow, like how powerful would it be to, how powerful is it rather that you're a former NFL player, you're also Black, you're also gay, and you're talking about an issue that you could probably choose to ignore, but for some reason it's inside of you. And the word that people often tell me is that it feels like it's authentic. And I think that that's really probably the best word that someone can describe you. I don't know if it's authentic. It just is what it is. I get really scared oftentimes. Like, that's the most scariest discussion that I have. So I was recently on a panel at this private meeting with a bunch of Democratic national people, and I was the only man on a panel of women talking about how Donald Trump's misogynistic and sexist language wasn't a disqualifier. People just viewed it as distasteful, right? So now I'm the only man on the panel talking about this issue. So I'm really nervous that, one, I don't take up too much space, because that's what typically happens when you have men on a panel with women, right? We want to take up too much space. And I was also careful that I wasn't telling women what they should think about this issue, because I don't know, right? So it is probably the issue that I get the most energy around, but it's also the one that I'm the most fearful of, to not do the things that I'm trying to get other men not to do. So I think that part of why it enlivens me so much is that it is always going to be a struggle that I'm going to have to work through. So maybe that's exactly where I should be kind of sitting in, is the space where I'd be most uncomfortable, because that's what I tell other folks to do, is sit in spaces of uncomfortableness and you'll grow. And I think that I've grown the most as an individual as I've started to center gender equality into the stuff that I talk about.
I think that's also some really super powerful advice about, sit in the spaces you're uncomfortable with. It may not feel good, but it's going to feel really good when you grow. And it's so important to do it. That's, especially I think recently, there's a lot, especially online, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're at, when we express our opinions publicly, especially when we're centered on something and we feel strongly about something and we're sharing our message, we can be met with a lot of positive and negative, especially if we're playing in this uncomfortable space. So I can see a lot of good responses that you receive and that many of us receive.
Yeah, like I'm actually shocked that I don't get as much negative vitriol as other people that I know who do similar work do. Like I'm on Twitter fairly often, and I would say if I get 1,000, positive messages of feedback, I may only get 2 or 3 negative. And I have no clue why that is. I think instead of me getting mad at someone when they make a really, a derogatory comment, I actually like to ask questions about why they're saying what they're saying. And I think that most people have never been asked why they think the way that they do. And they often also can't articulate it in such a way that doesn't make them feel stupid. So I try to just ask questions instead of really getting angry. And I think that keeps people, from coming at me in very negative ways that I do see other people who do similar work.
I agree. The questions really diffuse things. It almost stumps people a little bit and forces them to be a little bit more internal with their thinking.
Exactly.
So through these last few years, especially as you've gotten more into this, I'm just really curious too, not just online negativity maybe, but has there, the question I usually like to ask everybody too is this, it all can sound when we have these conversations like it's a bed of roses, like it's amazing this journey you've been on. Look at all these amazing things that you're doing, which I'm like, that's so good. And I'm sure there are tons of that, right? Because we can all see the stuff you're doing and things you enjoy. But I like to get into the truth of it, because what I try to unfold a little bit for our listeners too is life isn't like that. Like you're going to have a lot of down periods or there's going to be valleys that are, the valley of despair. And then, so I'm just curious a little bit too, like in this kind of the last few years too, especially from NFL to maybe today, Like, has there been some like tough spots for you where it's like maybe it's not as clear or things aren't working the way you want?
Yeah, I would say. So I'll be very frank, right? Like I do have a highly privileged life, and I like to own that. So whenever I say that there's something that's not working out for me, it's held in that context, right? So I would say that I'm still not close to my father. My biological father and I do not align on anything politically, specifically around LGBT equality. I would say that my father is pretty sexist, and again, not that I'm not, but I would say that there's a different level of awareness around it. So I really struggle having a relationship with my father. When I first came out, my mother and I didn't speak for about 2.5 years regularly, and my mother and I were best friends. I mean, like we used to talk every single day, twice a day. And when I told her I was gay, all that went away. We're really beautiful now, and she loves my fiance, and they talk, and they text, and they tweet, and it's disgusting, right? But there was a long period of time where it felt like I made a choice that was going to distance me from my biological family, and that was a real challenge. I did learn, though, throughout that process that I needed to ask more questions. I needed to understand why my mother thought the way that she did. And I learned a lot, that my mother actually wasn't quote unquote homophobic. What she was fearful of what the world would do to her black gay son, knowing that being black in itself is already, a scarlet letter. And to add another one was really where her fear came from, and then once I gave her the space to be able to articulate this and us to talk about it without me demonizing her, really created the opportunity for us to be where we're at now. And I don't think that we've ever been as vulnerable and can talk about as many things as we do now. I mean, even before I told her that I was gay. So that's been really beautiful. But as far as my father and one of my uncles, it's a challenge. It is also a challenge trying to have for lack of a better word, a relationship that's private. Like most people won't know that I'm engaged now and that I'm going to be married hopefully soon. But I try to keep my personal life very, very private. So to keep those two worlds separate is a great challenge because my partner didn't sign up for this activism. When we met, I was already doing it. So, and he's very, very supportive, but he's something that I want to keep personal and separate. And then also, I'd say the greatest challenge when it comes to work is to make sure that I don't exist in an echo chamber. That I'm not talking to the people who think just like me, because then you actually don't get much growth. But can I talk to others who actually don't think like me and don't show up? And people are going to get mad when I say this. I actually don't like the term changing hearts and minds. I actually think that it says something about that person that if I told you, Chris, hey, I'm here to change your heart and your mind, you're like, well, what's wrong with my heart? I think I'm a good person. Like all of us think that we're good people, right? So I think that we have to shift the language and from changing hearts and minds to having open and honest and vulnerable conversation. And then we can just hope that if we're both honest, we're both vulnerable, that people can move towards each other, not away from each other. But this idea that I'm going to change or fix you is problematic. And like, we're not here to fix people. Like we are whole individuals, who can break apart from time to time. But I'm no more put together than someone who supports Trump, right? So how do I think that is a big struggle, is how do I have compassion for individuals who do not think the way that I do, and do it in such a way that keeps the conversation going.
How do you stay aware of that you're not in the echo chamber? I mean, it's so easy to do. And I actually love that you brought it up because you absolutely hit on how I've been feeling for the last few months, where I'm like, everybody that's talking, I'm like, you're all saying the same thing. Yes, I agree. Like, because we all share the same opinion about something. I'm like, but that's not what matters. We have to talk to the people that don't feel that way, and connect and have real conversations about stuff. So how do you, like, not just you can realize it, but how do you push through that? Like, how do you say, gosh, I got to try something new?
I put myself intentionally in spaces where I know people are going to disagree with me about certain topics. It's actually very easy being a male, putting yourself in spaces where other men who want to agree with you around gender. I mean, that's a really easy thing. Like, so whether it's, going to watch a sports game with some of my friends, or going to the barbershop, or, like, it's very easy for me to get into a debate with other men around gender justice, because not everyone is at the same level of consciousness. That's very easy. I think it's hard to meet non-people of color who actually want to talk to you openly about race. That's the hardest one. But I do have, friends is probably the wrong word, people who I know from the New York Gay Flag Football League and even beyond, who don't see the world through the same lens that I do. That's the greatest challenge, is to keep that person engaged, keep that conversation going, and not to unfriend them on Facebook because they say something that's really problematic. Like, I have a friend is, again, probably a strong word, but someone who I used to be really closer with, and now that I know his politics, we've become less close, right? So how do I find space for him is a great, great challenge. How do I muster the courage to ask him to have coffee, at dinner, and sit down and have this conversation, when inside of me I'm like, do you realize that what you're fighting for is totally opposite of not what I'm fighting for, but directly impacts me and people who look like me, but then also understanding that some people take economics over social issues, right? And how do I, understand that and get to know that? So it's easy for me to be in spaces with people who are different from me around LGBT equality and for gender equality, but the racial equality piece is much harder. Oftentimes I am in an echo chamber, and I've been thinking a lot more about how do I get out of that space to get to talk to straight white men, and straight white women around the issue of race.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that, and it is really tough. Do you have, just looking at the future a little bit too, because I can think about the good stuff that you're doing and the conversations we're having, and I think it's going to be a lot of work for a long time. But do you have a vision or some goals that you're working toward, like, what you see change or something that you want to happen?
Yes, I would say the number one thing that I'm really excited about right now is creating a movement's the wrong word. Creating a national space where I go around the country talking to men specifically around gender equality. But like creating a book club, doing specific types of things that, like you can do, like the, feminism 101 for men. And then, getting a couple of celebrities aligned with this, where, we have a Twitter chat, and then, like you get a Kobe Bryant who's read this book, and then he gets on Twitter talking to other men about the book, or just creating spaces where men can have vulnerable, honest conversations with each other, right? That is closed off, similar to what I do with athletes now, but do that on a much broader scale. So men can leave those conversations with just a few things to reflect on, and to also say, wow, my favorite athlete, my favorite rapper, my favorite entertainer is talking about this issue, and I know nothing about it. I need to educate myself on it, because, that was pretty cool. And they're going to have another one, and I want to come to that one and not look like a clown. I think the one thing that I can do is play off of the male ego, right? It's like, men do not like to show up feeling as if they're a novice or uneducated and they can't join in the conversation, right? So how can I use that as the entry point to say, hey, we're going to be talking about this. I'm going to come to you with a question, and Draymond Green is going to be there, your favorite player, and boom, what are you going to say, right? Because no one wants to be filmed or shown as an idiot, right? So how do you, right. I think that is my big vision, and I'm actually in the process of doing that with some people. So hopefully, the next, 3 to 6 to 9 months, I can keep the work that I'm doing, which I'm really excited about, but also create the space to do something that I think is even larger.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right about the male ego. You couldn't see it. I was nodding. I was like, oh, yeah, I want to look like an idiot. And it's so hard for me to even realize that. So, you have been doing this for a few years. So I think this is probably a horrible term, but you're kind of this agent of change, right? You are this person who's sharing all these messages. Not everybody is at that space yet, but I know there's so many people in the world that do want to create change or help, shift an idea or a movement of something like that. Do you have any like advice or to someone that would want to, do more in their community or try something new, push harder, but kind of maybe don't know where to start?
Yeah. So the one thing that I'm trying to push athletes and entertainers to do is to think about what happened in your life that you felt was an inequality, right? So, there's so many athletes that I work with who grew up marginally housed, right? So what does it look like to educate an athlete on the issue of housing discrimination, connect he or she with a local organization in their community that is doing the work to end housing inequality, add their voice to that. So I think that one thing that most of us can do is think about, like, how did I grow up? Like, what about my childhood that I felt that really frustrated me? Whether it was housing, or I didn't like the way that my teachers were. I didn't like the fact that my mom was a single mother, or the fact that my father worked at a steel mill and that steel mill got shut down. Like, how can you align your purpose with something that you actually have tangible experience with? Educate yourself on it. Figure out who's doing that work in your local community and just join it. Like that's a really easy, tangible way. But I would say the first start is that you have to really sit. I like to say, just sit in stillness and think about, like, what am I really passionate about? If someone said that I could do anything in the world to fight for a specific cause, what would that cause be? And then think about why and how does that connect with your history, and then spend some really, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months educating yourself on that issue, and continually educate yourself on that, and then say, who's doing this in the community? Who's doing this, in my neighborhood that I want to, because I guarantee that someone is. And then just join that.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Start in your community as well. Be a voice.
Yeah, and I think that what people are going to find is that it's really exciting to think that you're having a positive impact on the world. And somebody else may not think you're having a positive impact, right? But the fact that you now have a purpose. And I'm sort of a practicing Buddhist. I meditate some, and the more that I feel like that I'm connecting my passion to my purpose, the more aligned that I feel as an individual, and the happier I am. Like, I don't think I've ever been happier in my life than I have been probably since 2014, when I just said, hey, like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do it, and I feel really good about it. And I don't think I've been happier. I don't think that I have made bad decisions because I'm aligning my passion with my purpose.
I completely agree. And that's actually kind of how this whole show started, was exactly that, which is...
And it's scary, right?
Like, it is.
It's really scary because typically you have to give up something in the short term. But I think that there's a huge long-term gain. And if you can have a vision for what it's going to look like in a year or 2 years, then you're going to be excited. But if you're focused on the fact that maybe for the next 6 months I'm going to be really afraid and struggling, like, that fear is going to continually drive you.
It's true. The fear does. I think people don't even say that it may be scary, but us also, man, is it motivating too? And I also, it goes back to your earlier point when you talked about, being invested in things, and the more we do it, the more it matters. When I asked you that question, it's when you align your purpose and passion, the more you align it, the more you actually are invested, the more skin you have in the game. And now you don't want it to let it down. Like, you want to keep doing more.
Yeah, it's oftentimes the reason why, some of us work hard in school because we don't want to let our parents down. The worst thing that my mother could say to me was that I'm disappointed. Mm-hmm. Not that you're mad, not that you're angry, because that's typical. But when my mother said, did you disappoint me? I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like she actually had, something else in mind, and I, missed it.
Mm-hmm. That's really true. I can remember that. Well, this has been a great conversation, Wade. I like I said earlier, I love all the stuff that you're doing, and I can see that you keep growing and doing more. And I think it's helpful for people to also see that, you can also pivot and shift your career and your focus like you've done from football, but use your skills, to do something even bigger and better. So it's been terrific.
Thank you so much. The one thing that I would add, and I want people to know this, is that every decision that I've made hasn't been easy, and I've been afraid a lot, and I'm still afraid a lot. But every time I've been afraid, then I know I'm on the right path. If I do something that feels extremely easy, then it's probably not the way that I should go, and it's because I'm afraid to do something new. And I'm not always perfect in that, but I try to go, is this something that makes me uncomfortable? That's the route that I should continually go in. Yeah.
I think that's so true. I chuckle because even when it's uncomfortable, you're kind of like, oh yeah, but I don't want to do it.
Exactly.
And you need to do it, and it's once you come out on the other side of it, gosh, does it feel good, because you can look back and say, it just, not that you were just successful, but you did something that mattered, and that's usually what counts.
Yeah, and you did it not for yourself, but you did it because you wanted to grow and stretch. Like, I think that we like to sit in our comfort. Like, we're like, oh, this is so nice. Ooh, this is great. But when you have to get out of your comfort zone, you start to get a little nervous. Like, do I have the talent, or is it going to fail? Like, there's so much doubt that comes up in our minds. So how do we kind of slow our minds down, silence that doubt, and walk through it?
Yeah, absolutely agree. So the last question I always usually like to ask too is just, and I think you're pretty easy to find, but what's the best places online for people to follow along and learn more about you and to see the work that you're doing?
I would say the best place is Twitter. I do have a Facebook page, but once you get past a certain like threshold of people, you can't add any more friends. And I need to get better on my quote unquote other page that you can have a maximum. Like an intended number of followers. But Twitter is probably the place where I'm the most active. And also my email address is on there. So if anyone wants to ask me questions or know about more work that I'm doing, it's on there. It's info@wadeadavis.com. So please reach out. And I do respond.
And that's so great. That's perfect. That's usually what we like to encourage for people that are listening to. It's not just, hey, listen to this great conversation, but let's get involved. Let's continue the conversation, find out what we can do together. So we'll link all of that stuff online.
Yeah. And also folks can DM me. Like my DMs on Twitter is open. So as long as you don't say anything crazy, I will respond. Like I said, I'm on Twitter way too much, but
I do know that is your social media of choice, because I see you message there quite a bit. So absolutely. I mean, and it's not a bad thing at all. I think it's just a powerful tool. And so, but I can see that you are active.
Yeah, I'm trying to get into Instagram. I'm not really the artistic photo guy type. I'm trying. My manager's like, you got to do Instagram more because younger people are on there. And I'm trying to figure out other ways to engage with young people that is not Instagram. But I just don't. I don't get it. I'm not a selfie guy.
We should just have a separate conversation. I could probably give you some easier tips that you could do that doesn't include a selfie.
There you go. I just don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it really is true. It's just a visual format. So anyways, let's wrap this up. So I can then tell you some Instagram stuff. But again, thanks so much for taking the time today.
No problem. Have a great day, Chris.
So what'd you think? Any new ideas? Are you going to try something new? I'm always left feeling great and have a ton of ideas after these conversations. The guests are totally energizing me. Speaking of being energized, did you guys know about my Awesome Finds newsletter? Each week I share creative spotlights, meaningful stories, and new ideas to spark your imagination. And the reason I'm really doing it, I just want to share the great stuff in the world that energizes me to energize you. So if you want to sign up or you want to find out more information about it, go to awesomefinds.info. That's AWESOMEFINDS.info. Okay, back to the show. If you want to share thoughts about the guest or how the show sparked a new idea, I'd love to hear about it. You can call me and leave me a message at 1-707-347-9312. Just include your name and a brief message, and you may even be featured on the next show. If you want to follow along with me and see behind-the-scenes fun and my adventures, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at @MeChristopher. That's MECHRISTOPHER. You can also follow Accidental Information on Instagram and Facebook at Accidental Information, and on Twitter at Accidental Info. Also, we publish original articles weekly about following your passions, getting creative, and a lot more, all at accidentalinformation.com. Lastly, if you love the show and want to spread the goodness, go tell a friend about it. As in literally text someone or go email it to them. I'd love it. Also, make sure you subscribe to receive new episodes automatically each week. Thanks again for joining the conversation. Okay, that's it. We'll talk again next week.